There isn't anyone here in this church today who didn't live through some part of the civil rights era in the United States. And most of us lived at the time of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's campaigns of nonviolent action aimed at changing the face of major social and racial injustice in America. We all have our own memories and experiences of those years, which will live with us forever. Mine is called Mississippi Hot. 12-year-old cousin Frank, 11-year-old me, and my 10-year-old sister Lily are inseparable these days. It's 1960. Papa's dying from cancer. Dad drove us down from Ohio to Crystal Springs, Mississippi, a suburb of Jackson, so Mom can help take care of her dad, my papa. It seems like everyone feels sorry for us kids. They probably should feel sorry for Papa. He's the one who's sick. I know they're trying to protect us, but we know he's going to die, and there's nothing we can do about it. Mississippi's hot, very hot. Papa has air conditioning that works in his sick room. The rest of the house swelters by with half-hearted air conditioners and multiple fans. One particularly scorching day, Aunt Marguerite, Frank's mom, says, "You kids go on and get your swimsuits. Here's some towels, Frank. Your daddy's going to take y'all to the town pool." The town pool. Hooray! I love swimming. I love water. I will stay in the water until my skin turns purple from cold or puckers from exposure or until threatened with being yanked out by the hair. So missing shack time, which was our converted chicken coop playhouse for the summer, is okay with me. We pile into the car. The pool is packed. It looks like every kid in Crystal Springs has the same idea. I run from the car through the gate, throw my towel on the ground without stopping to stake out a resting place, jump in at full speed, and sink deliciously under the cool water. All the icky stickiness of Mississippi Hot disappears. This is a good place to stay put. I wend my way underwater around all the bodies and hold my breath as long as I can. After a while, I see everyone get out of the water. Cousin Frank is at the corner of the deep end, gesturing wildly for me to do the same. I look around and say, "Why? What's wrong with you? This is great. The pool is empty." I silently ask myself, why am I the only one in the water? The lifeguard still sits in his chair and he's not yelling at me, so I ignore Frank, take a deep breath, and sink down to the bottom like I like to do, and pretend to be a mermaid who lives in the sea with my make-believe best friend. Back up on the surface, I see a few more people in the pool. Oh, good, I think. That's better. Then I notice that the kids in the pool with me are colored. I sink back down and weave myself around the ladder that has become a sunken ship. Up for another breath, the 3 Negro children are still splashing, and everyone else stands at the edge of the pool, looking at the 4 of us. 3 young colored children and me. Frank still desperately waves, now from the corner of the shallow end. I look at him and shake my head. "No," I mouth. "He's nuts. I'm not getting out. No way." And sink back down. Sometimes I worry that I'll forget I'm underwater and start to breathe. Sometimes I think I am really breathing. But maybe that's only a dream, like the dreams we have of flying. I come back up for a real gulp of air and see the other children getting out. They pick up their towels and walk through the gate. As they leave, my sister slides into the pool. She swims over to me, turning her head from side to side like someone's going to yank her underwater by the leg. "Uncle Doug is here. We have to leave." "Oh, pooh. All right, I'll get my towel." On the way home, Frank starts to tell his dad about the black family in the pool. I don't let him finish and chime in. "It was crazy, Uncle Doug. What is wrong with people?" Uncle tries to explain things away. "Well, you're not up in Ohio now. This is Mississippi." I explode. "Because we're in Mississippi? That's a reason to behave so awful? That makes no sense at all." We don't talk about it over dinner. Catfish, hush puppies, and lots of iced tea. We do not talk about it ever again. Our small town in Ohio has no Negro families. I heard in school and on the news about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and other racial stuff. But to me, those were faraway TV things, not real life. I never saw prejudice up close. The swimming pool in Crystal Springs, Mississippi, taught me that particular ugly. The next day is Mississippi Hot again. Under the shade of a very large oak tree, Lily and I cut old Mac's long, shaggy hair. The big old sheepdog looks dreadful, but maybe he'll be cooler. Frank has climbed on top of the shack and is pitching china berries, so I'm not going to go near him. It'll be almost 2 weeks before old Mac comes out from his hiding place under the porch. Part 2. Our cousin Boots has a convenience store in close by Martinsville, Mississippi. The store's name is It. Uncle Doug has some errands to run, so he thinks he'll stop by It and see how Boots and his wife Julia are doing. We 3 kids tag along. Boots is at the register, and Julia is trying to keep the dust on the shelves from settling thick on the boxes of grits and cans of lard. Uncle Doug gives us each a nickel to buy something so the grown-ups can visit some. I pick out a stick of candy and go to stand in line to pay. Before I can straighten the glasses on my face, I'm at the register. The 6 people in line ahead of me let me go first. Oh, I say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut. Please, go on. But no one budges. They shuffle their feet a little and don't look each other in the eyes. Cousin Boots stand at the register, watching. No, miss, you go on, one of the customers says. You Mr. John's grandbaby, right? Yes, I say, but he wouldn't want you to favor me none. Oh, no, miss, you go on and say hey to your grandpa for us. Yes, sir, I will. I'm not sure what's happening, but I know it isn't right. I look at all the dark faces around me. They're kindly, but I see in their eyes something I don't recognize. Fear, anger. I know I didn't do anything wrong, but it sure seems like I'm the cause of that fear and anger. I pay my nickel and walk out sucking on my candy stick to keep from crying. I feel so bad. Summer draws to a close and it's time to leave. Papa's about the same, not getting better, and school is starting back in Ohio. Dad arrives to carry us home in our big black 1959 Mercury station wagon. Mom and Dad take turns and we drive straight through on the new interstate highway system, thanks to President We Like Ike Eisenhower. Up Route 55 to Route 40, through Memphis and Cincinnati, onto Route 65 to 71, and back home. I'm sad to say goodbye to that Mississippi Hot summer. I'd never see Papa again. He died the next month. But before we left, I remembered to tell him his friends at the It store said hello, and he was happy to hear that. I still think about them standing in line and letting me go ahead, and I think about the family in the swimming pool, and I remember all the fun and not so fun things that happened. It's all jumbled up in my head. I just need a while to sort it out some. I've been trying to sort it out, the events of that summer, for many years. It doesn't get any easier. When I think about it, it occurs to me that I was unwittingly experimenting in nonviolent protest to promote social justice. Of course, I didn't call it that. I was 11, for Pete's sake. I just knew that some things were very wrong, and those things felt terrible to me. Martin Luther King in the mid-20th century was one of many in a long line of leaders using the philosophy of nonviolent demonstration to advocate social change. The first historically recorded evidence of this belief occurred in China from 470 to 371 BCE, when the Mohist philosophical school manifested its disapproval of war by cultivating the science of fortification. Fast forward to the early 19th century when Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote his poem, The Mask of Anarchy, following the Peterloo Massacre in England. This carnage took place in August of 1819 in Lancashire, England, when the cavalry charged 60 to 80,000 people who had gathered to demand parliamentary representation. 18 people were killed and hundreds injured. In his call for freedom, Shelley's poem is perhaps the first modern statement of the principle of nonviolent resistance. This poem is 91 stanzas long. I won't read the whole thing. I'll read stanzas 79 and 80. Stand ye calm and resolute like a forest, close and mute, with folded arms and looks, which are weapons of an unvanquished war. And let panic, who outspeeds the career of armed steeds, pass, a disregarded shade, through your phalanx undismayed. No other historical figure is more recognized for the practice of this principle than Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Dr. King was so enamored of Gandhi's principles that he and his wife, Coretta Scott King, traveled to India in 1959 and spent 5 weeks there immersed in the culture. King said that Mahatma Gandhi was the guiding light of nonviolent social change. Mahatma, which is what his followers called him, means great soul. Gandhi started his active public life around 1920 when he advocated for India's independence and improvement in the lives of the untouchable caste of India's multi-layered societal structure. Gandhi called his philosophy Satyagraha, which loosely translated means truth force, from 2 Sanskrit words, satya, which means truth, and agraha, insistence. He used this concept in the early 1930s to take direct action to resist the British tax on its salt monopoly in India. He and his followers participated in a 24-day march, the Salt March, 10 miles a day for 24 days. He started with a few dozen followers, but by the time they reached their destination, he was leading tens of thousands. The police forcefully arrested him, but the Satyagraha continued. It took years, but India finally received its independence in 1947. Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated 6 months later. Being the great admirer that he was, MLK patterned his demonstrations after him, although in a self-fulfilling quote, King wrote, quote, "The world doesn't like people like Gandhi. They don't like people like Christ. They don't like people like Abraham Lincoln. They kill them." And this man who had done all of that for India, who had given his life and who mobilized and galvanized 400 million people for independence, here was a man of nonviolence falling at the hands of a man of violence. Here was a man of love falling at the hands of a man of hate. This seems the way of history. End quote. Dr. King's Birmingham campaign was modeled after Gandhi's Salt March. Birmingham, Alabama is the largest city in the police state that was led by Governor George Wallace, whose inauguration vow was segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. In the spring of 1963, after staging many sit-ins at lunch counters, a children's crusade was planned. This is the origin of some of the infamous pictures we have seen of snarling dogs and fire hoses being used against young demonstrators. 2 days later, another group, this time adults, traveled the same path. Again, the police were ordered to fire hose them. This time they did not. They could not spray powerful streams on the people kneeling and praying in front of them. They had had enough. It was a victory for the civil rights movement, even though MLK and his best friend Ralph Abernathy were not present as they had been arrested. In his career, King was arrested 29 times. It was during this time at the Birmingham jail that he wrote his famous treatise, letter from a Birmingham jail. He had been accused by 8 clergymen who asserted that his demonstrations were illegal. King argued that not only was civil disobedience justified in the face of unjust laws, but was necessary and even patriotic. He addressed their accusations, and I quote, "The answer lies in the fact that there are 2 types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all." That's from his letter from a Birmingham jail. The summer of 1963 is renowned in civil rights history for the March on Washington. In late August, over 250,000 people gathered on the National Mall in front of the Lincoln Memorial. John Lewis, who is still with us today, spoke, as did Fred L. Shuttlesworth. No women were allowed to speak, but Mahalia Jackson sang, "I've been buked and I've been scorned." I've been buked and I've been scorned. I've been buked and I've been scorned. Children, I've been buked and I've been scorned. I've been talked about, shows you born. There is trouble all over this world. There is trouble all over this world. Children, there is trouble all over this world. There is trouble all over this world. Ain't gonna lay my religion down. Ain't gonna lay my religion down. Children, ain't gonna lay my religion down. Ain't gonna lay my religion down. The man the crowd came to see was finally introduced. When the thunderous chanting of his name subsided, the crowd could hear his voice, first a little husky and slow, then growing in resonance. Legend has it that Mahalia shouted out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin, the dream." He turned from his prepared notes and started improvising as only a preacher such as he could do. With a little bit of the Bible mixed in with literature and poetry and spiced up with history, he offered to us his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. 3 months later, President John F. Kennedy was killed. Coretta Scott King tells of that day as she and her husband sat in silence watching the television. When the announcement came that the president was gone, MLK's chilling comment was, "This is exactly what is going to happen to me." In July of the next year, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. That same year, Dr. King received the Nobel Peace Prize. But peace was a long ways away. Bloody Sunday on the Edmund Pettus Bridge will forever be a blemish on our collective souls. 500 marchers tear-gassed and bullwhipped cannot be erased from memory. King was not there in person. John Lewis and Hosea Williams led that march. The week after Bloody Sunday, Dr. King led the march out of Selma to Montgomery. It was after this event that the Reverend James Reeb, a white Unitarian minister from Boston, was killed. 2,000 people attended Reeb's funeral, where he was eulogized by King. The Selma campaign lasted for months and produced the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Selma was followed by campaigns in Chicago, Washington, D.C., and then finally, his last stop, Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King is a martyr, just as Mahatma Gandhi was a martyr. It is interesting and alarming to note that the current Prime Minister of India is on a path to remove civil rights from millions of Muslims to make his country an all-Hindi nation, a philosophy that is shared by Gandhi's assassin. It is interesting and alarming to note that white nationalists in America are undermining the Voting Rights Act by all different kinds of means, including gerrymandering, changing voting criteria illegally, and closing polling places. What does that tell us? One might suggest that the phrase certain unalienable rights doesn't mean the same thing to all people. It also tells us that we must be ever diligent and mindful of the erosion of those rights. They slip away till one day you wake up and they are gone. We have made a lot of progress, but sometimes that progress is 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and only 1 back. In the future, several hundred years from now, if humanity survives, we will all be a mixture of each other. Black will marry brown, brown marry yellow, white marry red, and so on, and we will all be diverse in our homogeny and homogeneous in our diversity. In Martin Luther King's words, and I quote, "I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." End quote. I too have a dream today. I dream that in the future, children will jump into the water of the town pool in Crystal Springs, Mississippi, and no one will be able to tell what color anyone is, and more so, no one will care. Together, they will all share the relief of the cool, cool water from the unbearable Mississippi Hot. I dream that all people standing in line, any line, whether it be at a tiny rural store or a voting booth or at an immigration checkpoint, I dream they and all people will be treated with respect, treated with dignity, and prove what we profess to believe, that all men and women are created equal. That is my dream.